positions so that matters that are of mutual interest can be dealt with in an efficient and effective way in the interests of both the United States and Russia. So there is nothing unusual about it. In fact, despite this seemingly harsh rhetoric, we did expect those suggestions because the U.S. domestic political agenda made it impossible for us to restore the relationship at an acceptable level. This meeting should have taken place at some point. So President Biden launched this initiative. Prior to that, as you will know, he had supported the extension of the START treaty, which of course was bound to meet with support from our side, because we believe that this is a treaty in the area of containment of strategic offensive weapons. It has been worked through and thoroughly and meets our interests and meets the U.S. interests. So this offer could be expected.
Will you go into the summit agreeing to begin more arms control talks immediately after the summit? Because, as you mentioned, President Biden has extended New START by 5 years. Washington would like that to be the beginning, not the end of that conversation.
We know what matters and what problems Americans want to discuss with us. We understand these questions, matters, and problems. We are prepared for this joint work. We have certain, if not differences, then different understandings of what pace, at what pace, and in what directions we need to be moving. We know what constitutes priorities for the U.S. side, and generally speaking, this is a process that needs to be advanced at the professional level, along the lines of the Foreign Ministry and Defense Ministry on the Russian side, and Pentagon and the State Department on the U.S. side. We are prepared for this work. We've heard signals that the U.S. side would like to see these negotiations resumed at this expert level of professionals. We will see if the conditions for this have been created following the summit. Of course, we're not saying no. We are prepared to do this work.
President Biden wants predictability and stability. Is that what you want?
Well, these are the most important things. This is the most important thing. This is the most important value, if you will, in international affairs.
Sorry to interrupt you, but he would say that you have caused a lot of instability and unpredictability.
Well, he says one thing, I say another thing, but maybe at some point, in certain ways, our rhetoric varies and is different. But if you ask my opinion now, I'm telling you what it is. The most important value in international affairs is predictability and stability. And I believe that on the part of our U.S. partners, this is something that we haven't seen in recent years. What kind of stability and predictability could there be if we remember the 2011 events in Libya, where the country was essentially taken apart, broken down? What kind of stability and predictability were there? There has been talk of a continued presence of troops in Afghanistan, and then all of a sudden, boom, the troops are being withdrawn from Afghanistan. What, is this predictability and the stability again? Now, the Middle East events, is this predictability and stability, what all of this will lead to, or in Syria? What is stable and predictable about this? I've asked my U.S. counterparts, you want Assad to leave? Who will replace him? What will happen when somebody replaces him? The answer is odd. The answer is, I don't know. Well, if you don't know what will happen next, why change what there is? It could be a second Libya or another Afghanistan. Do we want this? No. Let us sit down together, talk, look for compromise solutions that are acceptable for all the parties. That is how stability is achieved. It cannot be achieved by imposing one particular point of view, the quote-unquote correct point of view, whereby all the other ones are incorrect. That is not how stability is achieved.
Let's get to some of those issues. I want to just talk a little bit more about your relationship with President Biden. This will not be the Helsinki summit. President Biden is not President Trump. You once described President Trump as a bright person, talented. How would you describe President Biden?
Well, even now, I believe that former U.S. President Mr. Trump is an extraordinary individual, talented individual. Otherwise, he would not have become a U.S. president. He's a colorful individual, and you may like him or not. And he didn't come, of course, from the U.S. establishment. He had not been part of big-time politics before. And some like it, some don't like it, but that is a fact. President Biden, of course, is radically different from Trump because President Biden is a career man. He has spent virtually his entire adulthood in politics. He has been doing it for a great deal of years, and I have already said that, and that is an obvious fact. Just think of the number of years he spent in the Senate, and how many years he was involved in matters of international politics and disarmament, virtually at the expert level. That is a different kind of person, and it is my great hope that, yes, there are some advantages, some disadvantages, but there will not be any knee-jerk reactions on behalf of the sitting U.S. president, and that we will be able to comply with certain rules of engagement, certain rules of communications, and we'll be able to find points of contact and common points. That's about it, and what will actually happen, we will need to live and see based on the actual practical policies and results thereof.
Well, President Biden says, one time when you met, you were inches away from each other, close to each other. And he said to you, I'm looking in your eyes and I can't see a soul. And you said, we understand each other. Do you remember that exchange?
As far as soul, I'm not sure. One has to think about what soul is. But I do not remember this particular part of our conversations, to be honest with you. I do not remember. We all, when we meet, when we get together, when we talk, when we work, we strive and achieve for some solutions. We all proceed from the interests of our nations and our states, and this is fundamental and is the bedrock of all our actions and intentions. And this is the driving force and the motive for organizing meetings of this kind. And as far as soul goes, that's something for the church.
Yeah, you're a religious man. President Biden is saying he told you to your face you don't have a soul.
I do not remember this.
He says it was 10 years
Maybe
ago.
there's
10 years
something
ago
wrong
when he was vice president, he says.
with my memory. Well, he probably has a good memory. I do not rule this out, but I don't remember this. Generally, in personal encounters, people try to act appropriately. I do not remember any inappropriate elements of behavior on the part of my counterparts. I don't think that anything like that has happened.
Would you have felt that was an inappropriate thing to say?
Well, that depends on the context. It depends on what form they're said in. You know, one can say it in different ways. It can be presented in different ways. But generally, people meet up in order to establish a relationship and create an environment and conditions for joint work with a view to achieving some kind of positive results. If one is going to have a fight with somebody else, why bother and have a meeting to begin with? One is better off looking into budget and social policies domestically. We have many issues that we have to resolve. What's the point then? It's just a waste of time. Of course, one can present this for domestic political consumption, which I believe is what has been done in the United States in the last few years, where the US-Russia relationship was sacrificed for the sake of a fierce political strife inside the US. We can see that. We know it well. We have been accused of all kinds of things, election interference, cyber attacks, and so on and so forth. And not one time did they bother to produce any kind of evidence or proof, just unfounded accusations. I'm surprised that we have not yet been accused of provoking the Black Lives Matter movement. That would have been a good line of attack.
What do you think?
We did not do that.
What do you think of the Black Lives Matter movement?
I think that, of course, this movement was used by one of the political forces domestically in the course of election campaigns. But there are some grounds for it. Let's remember Colin Powell, who was Secretary of State, and he was also in charge of the Pentagon. Even he wrote in his book that even he, as a high-ranking official, had felt some kind of injustice towards himself his entire life, as someone with a dark complexion, even from the USSR days. And in Russia, we have always treated with understanding the fight of African Americans for their rights. And there are certain roots to it. There is a certain foundation for this. But no matter how noble the goals that somebody is driven by, if it reaches certain extremes, if it spills over into extremism, acquires elements of extremism, we cannot approve this. We cannot welcome this. So our attitude to this is very simple. We do support African Americans' fight for their rights, but we are against any types and kinds of extremism, which unfortunately, sometimes, regrettably, we witness currently these days.
You mentioned cyber attacks and deny any involvement by Russia. But Mr. President, there is now a weight of evidence, a long list of alleged state-sponsored cyber attacks. Let me give you 5. There's a lot, but it makes a point. The US intelligence community says Russia interfered with the 2016 election. Election security officials said Russia tried to interfere with the 2020 election. Cybersecurity researchers said government hackers targeted COVID vaccine researchers, hacking for COVID vaccines. In April, the Treasury Department said the SolarWinds attack was the world's worst, with targets including 9 federal agencies. And just before your summit, Microsoft says it's discovered another attack with targets including organizations that have criticized you, Mr. Putin. Mr. President, are you waging a cyber war against America?
Dear Keir, you have said that there is a weight of evidence of cyber attacks by Russia. And then you went on to list those official US agencies that have stated as much. Is that what you did?
Well, I'm giving you information about who said it, so you can answer.
Right. You are conveying information to me as to who said that, but where is evidence that this was indeed done? I will tell you that this person has said that and that person has said this, but where is the evidence? Where is proof? When there are charges like that without evidence, I can tell you, you can take your complaint to the International League of Sexual Reform. Will you be happy about it? This is a conversation that has no subject whatsoever. At least put something on the table so that we can look and respond. But there isn't anything like that. The latest thing, as far as I know, one of the latest attacks, was against a pipeline system In the US, right, yes. So, what?
But you're mentioning...
Just a moment. As far as I know, the shareholders of this company even made a decision to pay the ransom. They paid off the cyber gangsters. If you have listed an entire set of US special services, powerful, respectable, global, after all, they can find whoever the ransom was paid to. And once they do that, I hope they will realize that Russia has nothing to do with it. Now, there's some kind of a cyber attack against a meat processing plant. Next time, they will say there was an attack against some Easter eggs. It's becoming farcical, like an ongoing farcical thing, a never-ending farcical thing. You said plenty of evidence, but you haven't cited any proof yet again. But this is an empty conversation, a pointless conversation. What exactly are we talking about?
You've moved on to this question of ransomware and criminals. Russian-speaking criminals, is the allegation, are targeting the American way of life: food, gas, water, hospitals, transport. Why would you let Russian-speaking criminals disrupt your diplomacy? Don't you want to know who's responsible?
You know, the simplest thing to do would be for us to sit down calmly and agree on joint work in cyberspace. And we did suggest that to Mr. Obama's administration. We started in September, during his last year in office. In October at first. They didn't say anything. Then in November, they came back to us and said that, yes, it was interesting. Then the election was lost. We restated this proposal to Mr. Trump's administration. The response was that it is interesting, but it didn't come to the point of actual negotiations. There are grounds to believe that we can build an effort in this area with the new administration. We hope that the domestic political situation in the United States will not prevent this from happening. But we have proposed to do this work together. Let's agree on the principles of mutual work. Let's find out what we can do together. Let's agree on how we will structure counter-efforts against this process that is gaining momentum. We here in the Russian Federation have a cybercrime that has increased many times over in the last few years. We are trying to respond to it. We're looking for cyber criminals. If we find them, we punish them. We are willing to engage with international participants, including the United States. You are the ones who have refused to engage in joint work. What can we do? We cannot build this work. We cannot structure this work unilaterally.
Well, I'm not the government, Mr. Putin. I'm just a journalist asking
you
questions. But if you clearly want to negotiate, you must have something to negotiate with. You don't ask for a truce unless you're fighting in a war.
You know, as far as the war, NATO, officially, I'd like to draw your attention to that. NATO has officially stated that it considers cyberspace a battlefield, an area of military action, and conducts military exercises in that
And you're involved in that battlefield. Russia is fighting on that battlefield, correct?
No.
Really?
That is not correct. Really? If we wanted to do that, NATO did say that it considers cyberspace an area of combat, and it prepares and even conducts exercises. What stops us from doing the same? If you do that, we will do the same thing, but we don't want that. Just like we don't want space militarized, in the same manner, we don't want cyberspace militarized. And we have suggested on many occasions agreeing on mutual work in the cybersecurity area. But your government refuses to.
I saw your proposal from September, from just in September. Isn't what you're proposing that if you can come to an agreement over hacking and election interference, then you'll call off the hacking and the election interference if America agrees not to comment on your elections and your political opponents?
What we count on is that nobody should interfere in domestic processes in other countries, neither the US in ours or we in the USA's or any other nations. All nations of the world should be given a chance to develop calmly. Even if there are crisis situations, they have to be resolved by the people domestically, without any influence or interference from the outside. But I don't think that this call by the US administration is worth anything. It appears to me that the US government will continue to interfere in political processes in other countries. I don't think that this process can be stopped, because it has gained a lot of momentum. However, as far as joint work in cyberspace to prevent some unacceptable actions on the part of cyber criminals, that definitely is something that can indeed be agreed upon. And it is our great hope that we will be able to establish this process with our US partners.
If you were in America, what would you fear might happen next? The lights being switched off the way they were in Western Ukraine in 2015?
I don't understand. You mean if I were in America? What would I be afraid of if I were an American, or what?
What should Americans worry? What might happen next if there's no agreement on cyber?
You know, this is the same as space militarization. This is a very dangerous area. At some point in the past, in order to achieve something in the nuclear area, in terms of confrontation in the area of nuclear weapons, the USSR and the United States did agree to contain this particular arms race. Cyberspace is a very sensitive area. As of today, a great deal of human endeavors rely upon digital technologies, including the functioning of government. And of course, interference in these processes can cause a lot of damage and a lot of losses. And everybody understands that. And I'm repeating for the third time, let's sit down together and agree on joint work on how to achieve security in this area. That is all. But what is bad about it? I don't even understand. I'm not asking you. I'm not trying to put you on the spot. But for me, as an ordinary citizen, it would not be clear and understandable. Why is it that your government refuses to do it? Accusations keep coming, including up to interference and involvement in a cyber attack against some kind of a meat processing plant. But in the meantime, our proposal to start negotiations in this area are being turned down. This is some kind of nonsense, but that's exactly what's been happening. I repeat one more time. It is my hope that we will be able to start engaging in positive work in this area. In terms of what's to be afraid of, why is it that we suggest agreeing on something? Because what people can be afraid of in America, the very same thing can be a danger to us. US is a high-tech country. NATO has declared cyberspace an area of combat. That means they are planning something. They are preparing something. So obviously, this cannot but worry us.
Do you fear that American intelligence is deep inside Russian systems and has the ability to do you a lot of damage in cyber?
I'm not afraid, but I bear in mind that it is a possibility.
Let me ask you about human rights, an issue that President Biden will raise, Mr. President. He'll raise the issue of Alexei Navalny, targeted for assassination, now in a Russian jail. Mr. President, why are you so threatened by opposition?
Who says that I feel threatened by opposition, or we're threatened by opposition? Who told you? Who told you that?
Well, a Russian court has just, excuse me, I'm sorry, a Russian court has just outlawed organizations connected to Mr. Navalny. Literally every non-systematic opposition figure is facing criminal charges. In journalism, Medusa and V-Times have been hit with foreign agent labels and face collapse. Mr. President, it's as if dissent is simply not tolerated in Russia anymore.
Well, you are presenting it as dissent and intolerance towards dissent in Russia. We view it completely differently. You have mentioned the law on foreign agents, but that's not something that we invented. That law was adopted back in the 1930s in the United States, the law on foreign agents. And that law is much harsher than ours, and it is intended, among other things, at preventing interference in the domestic political affairs of the United States. And on the whole, I believe it is justified.
Mr. President,
do you want me to answer? Would you like me to answer? Would you
in
like
America,
me to keep answering?
we call what you're doing now whataboutism. What about this? What about that? It's a way of not answering the question. Let me ask you a direct question. Did you?
I will look.
Let me ask.
I will look. No, let me answer. You've asked me a question. You're not liking my answer, so you're interrupting me right away. This is inappropriate. So there we go. In the United States, this law was adopted a long time ago. It's working, and sanctions under that law are much harsher than here. Up to and including imprisonment. Yes, correct. Again, you're not letting me, but I will revert to us. Do not worry, I will go back to us. I will not remain focused on U.S. problems exclusively. I will revert and go back and comment on what's happening here.
I thought your belief was that nations shouldn't intervene in other countries' domestic affairs.
Correct.
Shouldn't comment on other countries' politics. But there you are doing it again.
No. If you muster some patience and let me finish saying what I mean to say, everything will be clear to you. But you're not liking my answer. You don't want my answer to be heard by your audience. That is the problem. You're shutting me down. Is that free expression, or is that free expression the American way?
Please answer.
So, thank you very much. Here we go. The U.S. adopted this law. We passed this law only very recently in order to protect our society against outside interference. In some of the states in the U.S., if a foreign observer approaches a polling station, the prosecutor says, come a few feet closer and you'll go to jail. Is that normal? Is that democracy in the modern world? But that is an actual practice in some of the states. We don't have anything like that. When I talk about these laws about non-interference or attempts at interference, what do I mean as applied to Russia? Many entities of the so-called civil society, the reason I say so-called is because many of those entities are funded from abroad. Specific relevant action programs are prepared. Their core members are trained abroad. And when our official authorities see that, then in order to prevent this kind of interference in our domestic affairs, we make relevant decisions and adopt relevant laws. And they're more lenient than yours. We have a saying, don't be mad at the mirror if you're ugly. It has nothing to do with you personally. But if somebody blames us for something, what I say is, why don't you look at yourselves? you will see yourselves in the mirror, not us. There is nothing unusual about it. As far as political activities and the political system, it is evolving. We have 44 registered parties, well, 34, I think, and 32 are about to participate in various electoral processes across the entire country in September.
Yes. We only have a limited amount of time.